Oh, hi. Oh, I forgot you were coming. 1 second. Oh, hi. Thanks for dropping by. Come on in. Welcome to my jungle. Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome if this is the first time you're watching one of my videos. I'm Jan, also known as Sydney Plant Guy, and I grow aeroids indoors and share it with you over here on YouTube. Spring is in full swing, and with that comes changes in the sunlight exposure I get here in my apartment. So I rearranged all of my living area to optimize the sun exposure that my plants get. In this living area, I'm mainly relying on natural light, apart from the IKEA cabinet, which I'll show you later on. So I really just need to make sure I really understand how the sun moves through my apartment over the seasons, and then arrange my plants accordingly. So I thought I'll take you along, talk you through my thought process in rearranging the plants and why I put certain plants in certain spots, and of course just show you all of the beautiful species that are growing in my living area as well. Before we look into a few more plants in detail, let me just share with you my overall thought process. So when it comes to interior design, I actually keep my apartment very basic. I really want the furniture in my apartment to be fairly modular, so I can change them around as I like. I'll probably rearrange 4, 5, 6 times a year. It's honestly just part of the hobby to me. I really appreciate just moving furniture around and feeling like I moved house without the hassle of having to move house. I've always been doing that. Even when I was a little kid, I was just rearranging my room all the time. So I'm really enjoying the freedom of having my own place and being able to just move the furniture around however and whenever I want. So I chose really basic modular furniture in very basic colors, predominantly white, just so they all kind of mix and match without me really having to worry about specific furniture items. Because really, when we're talking about the setup of my apartment, I take the plants' needs as a priority, and then the furniture and everything that I get to use is kind of just a result of where the plants don't want to be. So really, I just need to evaluate whereabouts are the brightest spots in my apartment and whereabouts are the darkest spots in my apartment. Furniture like the couch, my dining room table and so on go into the dark corners of the apartment, and the plants get to appreciate the beautiful natural light that I get in this apartment. You guys are currently standing in a northwest facing window. Keep in mind I'm in the southern hemisphere, so basically I get a lot of sun coming through this almost floor to ceiling window. Over there, I also have a northeast facing window, so I get the sunrise as well. So I'm really blessed with natural light in my living area over here. So of course, I want to take advantage of that and make sure that the plants get to appreciate all of that natural light as well. However, going into spring and summer, especially over here in Australia, I'm really dealing with the sun being way too hot and too much UV, which can potentially burn my plants. So I can't actually move plants too close to the windows. Instead, I really need to find like this sweet spot, which we probably call bright indirect light. When we talk about bright indirect light, I really want to stress the bright part, not necessarily the indirect part. Plants need light if you want to grow them to maturity. It's the #1 factor that actually enables them to grow large leaves. So I want to optimize the light in here. So I rearrange all the time to make sure I'm giving the plants the best spots based on the changing sun exposure. I live in an apartment and the view is pretty unobstructed, which means that in winter I actually get to observe the sun throughout the whole day, because the sun is really quite nice and low, meaning it also reaches all the way towards the back wall of my apartment. In summer, the sun is much higher up, so I get more sunlight, I get more sunlight hours, but the sunlight doesn't hit quite as far back into the apartment. So with different seasons come different challenges, hence I'm rearranging every now and then. You absolutely don't have to rearrange all the time. If your plants are happy and they're thriving, don't fix what's not broken. I mainly rearrange for my own sake. I love change, so I love mixing it up and feeling like I live in a brand new apartment. Alrighty, I think that was plenty of introduction. I think let's get started and look at a few plants in detail. Maybe let's just start off right over here. So over here I've created like a little island of plants. And it's really, they get a little bit of the morning sun still when the sun moves kind of over here. when the sun's kind of northish. So it gets a little bit of early afternoon sun, but overall it just gets really bright indirect light. It's only about a meter away from the northwest facing window. Right next to it, I've got my Philodendron atabapoense, and pretty much the same scenario with that one. I mean, it's grown pretty mature and has given me really, really large leaves. And really, to enable a plant to grow nice and large and mature, you do need to give them sufficient light. So this is getting one of the prime spots for exactly that reason. Next to it, we also have a Monstera pinnatipatita, and if you zoom in a little bit, you can see that it started to throw out some nice fenestrations. It had a little bit of spider mite damage a few weeks ago, but I think we overcame that. But you can tell that the leaves are slowly getting bigger. You can tell there's more and more fenestration coming with all of the leaves. So I know that it's on its best way to actually mature. So I'm giving it also quite a lot of light because, you know, that's what Monstera's like. All right, let's focus on this wall over here. This wall probably right now on camera looks pretty dark, but that's because it's still quite early in the morning over here. This wall gets fully illuminated when the sun actually sets in the northwest, kind of pretty much exactly right behind you. So I get quite a lot of nice afternoon sun. I get more afternoon sun in winter because the sun is a little bit lower. In summer, when the sun sets a little bit further in the west, so this gets actually less afternoon sun in summer, but it gets more sunlight hours and the sun that it gets is brighter. So at this stage, it should still be fine, but I'm really closely monitoring it to make sure that it is getting enough light and the plants closest to the window aren't really getting burned. Whenever I rearrange, it's not really like it's a continuous process, right? Like it's not like one day I rearrange and then I don't touch it for the next 3 months. I rearrange, putting plants in spots that I think they might do well, but ultimately I'd really need to monitor the plants as well, check for new growth, and then depending on the new growth, I might need to make adjustments. So for example, if I put a plant in a new spot and then the growth starts becoming leggy and the plant is actually growing smaller leaves instead of increasing in size, then I know I probably need to give it a little bit more light. And the other way around, if plants get crispy edges, leaves getting burned, then I'm probably giving a little bit too much light. So it is a continuous process, but over the last year and a half of living here, I got to learn a lot about my environment. I got to learn a lot about the sun and how the sun moves through the apartment throughout the day and throughout the season. So with every rearranging, I get a little bit better of anticipating which spots do well for which plants and so on. So maybe to point out a few over here would be my Monstera siltepecana El Salvador, which is finally giving me some nice consistent fenestrations over here. I've got at least 3 plants on here to create a nice lush look. Another one I want to point out is maybe this Monstera subpinnata. So this Monstera subpinnata is actually, I repotted this in my very first YouTube video. So my first video I uploaded, it was only 4 months ago. I potted this one up on a moss pole, and I think it had only these 3 leaves at the bottom over here. Now, since I put it on a moss pole, it started giving me these leaves, and they're really starting to increase in leaf size. And you can see that this plant has well and truly rooted into its pole and now starts climbing up that moss pole. I do nothing for it to climb up the moss pole. It does all of this just by itself. That's really in its DNA. It's a Monstera. It likes to climb. So you give it a support and you keep the support moist and these roots will find their way. Now I really like this one because it looks a little bit different. All right, let's maybe talk a little bit about this plant over here as well. I don't really give it enough attention on social media for sure, mainly because it's not an aeroid. So this is a Canna lily Stuttgart, and I just got it in April of this year as just a little bulb, and I potted it up in a very well, I potted it up in a medium that can retain a lot of moisture, and it absolutely loves a lot of sun. So this one gets a lot of direct sun when the sun hits through these windows. So any of my aeroids would actually get burned, but this plant appreciates all of that sun. And in return, it gives the plants behind it a little bit of shade. So the plants behind it are not getting burned by the sun. Maybe let's talk about this big one over here as well, because I suppose everybody's first thought, including my own first thought, would really be this plant. There's no way this plant is getting enough light to actually grow and survive in here. This is actually the plant that has always been in the darkest corner of my room. It's one of these, I don't really care if it grows or not plants, and because I don't care, it's obviously growing like crazy. You know, I really wanted to show to me, like, you know what, I'll show you what I can do, even though you don't care about me. Now, I still care enough about it to not get rid of it. If I really don't like a plant, I have no hesitation in making room for it, because space is precious. But I really appreciate it for that fact. Not all of the spots in my apartment are blessed with amazing natural light, but I want every corner in my apartment to be green. So I actually really like a plant where I'm not really too fussed about seeing it mature. I'm not too fussed how fast it grows. So this is perfect, and it's spreading out a lot, right? So I need a lot of room for it. So it's perfect being positioned in this darkest spot because it spreads out a lot, it fills up that corner, makes the corner look nice and green, but at the same time, I don't really need to worry about it getting insufficient light. It actually really seems to thrive on the insufficient light. Now this is a Philodendron Florida. Most of you would know it as, you know, like the Florida Beauty, the variegated version, or the Florida Ghost, the one that comes out white first. This is just a plain green form, but it's still giving me this amazing leaf shape, and it has really nice red petioles over here. So I think it's a stunning plant, but it's just one of these plants that don't really require much work. It's not really too fast. So wherever I got it right now is perfectly fine for it. So let's talk about this little arrangement over here. It's probably the part of the arrangement that I'm not too sure about, because I just think this is not going to get sufficient light. So I put plants over here that I don't necessarily have the intention in seeing mature any further, where I'm not mad if it just stays the way it is. I don't necessarily have more space for it to grow any larger anyway. So I've got this Philodendron ernestii over here. Don't get me wrong, I really, really like it, but I just don't have room for it to continue to grow. It's throwing out these really long petioles and really large leaves. And I've had this plant for less than a year. So I'm worried about the size that this can grow into. So I just needed it to stop a little bit. So I'm giving it less light just so it hopefully stops growing. I know that's kind of weird to hear, and you know, don't hate on me for doing it, but I obviously need to prioritize the plants that I really want to see mature and I really want to see well. I don't have enough space to give all of the plants perfect conditions. So this is just having to take a back seat, unfortunately. These plants over here, though, should be okay because they're getting a bit of indirect light from the IKEA cabinet as well. So I'm hoping that that supplemental grow light over here is just going to make them grow a little bit. You know, again, I'm not super fussed about these plants. If they just stay the way they are, I'm more than happy. Don't get me wrong, I don't like them. As always, if I don't like a plant, it wouldn't be here. But they're not necessarily the plants that I'm really wanting to see mature any further at this stage. And then we've got the cabinet over here. So the cabinet is really in the darkest spot of my apartment. So we are about 3 meters away from the northeast facing window and about 3.5 meters from the northwest facing window. So it doesn't get a whole lot of bright indirect light, or pretty much it doesn't really get much light. Actually, that Florida used to be right here and the cabinet used to be there. So this was the darkest spot and the Florida was still thriving in it. So I'm very confident that it's going to thrive in that new spot as well. Now, of course, because the cabinet doesn't really have to rely on natural light, it's producing its own light via the grow light inside, I can put this in the darkest corner of my apartment without actually having to worry about any of the plants inside, right? So that makes total sense. Now let's have a quick look. A lot of the plants actually had to move out of my cabinet because they're just slowly getting too large for it. So it's actually quite empty in here. But definitely one plant I want to point out to you is my queen. I'm trying my hardest to not touch it. This is the newest leaf and it just started unfurling. So I reckon this is going to grow much larger than this one on the left over here. But I don't want to touch it because these leaves are so sensitive. Anything that you do right now is going to turn into a big scar or a big marking later on. Let me also show you a few new additions I got since the last time I did a plant tour. I've got a little variegated Adansonii, and of course the new shoot is completely white, which is useless. You do not want white leaves. They might look good on Instagram, but a white leaf basically has zero functionality for the plant. If anything, it just takes away energy from the plant. It can't contribute to photosynthesis, so it will die. So you want green in your variegated plants, you don't want too much white. So I'm hoping that the one after that is going to bring back the green, but I've heard a lot of people having issues with variegated Adansonii and them reverting to full white. So I would be cautious with these sort of plants. Anytime you get a plant that is variegated, you know, you have chances of them either reverting to full green and being, well, a really expensive Adansonii, or you have chances of them reverting back to white, or like going full white, and then they're essentially useless, right? So keep that in mind. There's always a risk involved when you get any sort of variegated plants. Another new addition I got, I'll bring it closer, is this Philodendron Sharonii. Shazza, we call it Shazza. And I got that after visiting AJ's greenhouse and seeing it in her greenhouse. I really needed to get one. And as always, I love getting it as a small cutting, and then I pop it on a moss pole and I grow it to maturity in my environment. All of the plants that you see in here are got as a small cutting or as a small seedling, and I grew them to maturity and I established them in my apartment. Next to the IKEA cabinet, we've got the Monstera siltepecana, so the regular form. It's also giving me some nice fenestrations, but yeah, I don't know. It's one of these plants, I really like it because it's a nice compact plant that you can just pop in a corner and it fills that corner with some greenery. But yeah, I'm not giving it the best spot because I'm not really planning on seeing it mature. I'm more than happy with the way that it's currently growing. So I just want to keep it that way. I don't really aim for anything more. But let's move over there. Hello, my baby. Red is on his little throne, enjoying the morning sun, or early afternoon sun by now, really. Mwah! Daddy loves you. Alrighty, next corner of my living area. So you should be familiar with this area. This is where I used to film all of my YouTube videos. Now that I rearranged, I'm not actually quite sure where I'm supposed to film all of these. But my dining table used to be here, and this is kind of the wall on the back that you've always been seeing in my YouTube videos. So of course this Epipremnum, pinnatum, Cebu blue over here sticks out. It's in desperate need for a chop and extend, but at the moment I'm really appreciating the growth that it's giving me. But I think after that newest leaf at the top, I really do need to give it a chop. As you can probably tell by the footage, like it actually stops receiving really good light kind of from here upwards. So there is no point in me growing leaves really in this area of my wall because it's gonna get insufficient light, meaning it's actually not gonna be able to continue maturing. So chopping it and then potting it back up gives these new mature leaves, like they will be about here, which gets much more bright indirect light and a little bit of morning sun as well. So while it keeps it manageable for myself, you know, it's much easier to move a plant that's half the size of this one. It also actually helps the plant continue to maturing by giving it more access to light. Right next to it, we've got my Monstera dubia. Monstera dubia just recently had a chop, and I converted the pole to a grow vertical pole with a plastic backing, just in an effort to help it continue to mature, because it's getting to that size where my normal setup is not really going to enable it to continue to mature, but I want to see how large these leaves can get. So I needed to give it more room for the roots, so I opted for a pole that has the plastic backing, so all of the roots can be funneled back into the pot. But I'm recording a separate video on this. Just give me a little bit of time. You know, I love to show you guys results rather than just the process in itself. So, well, results take time, so just bear with me, but eventually that video will definitely be up on YouTube for you to enjoy. And right next to that, we've got my Epipremnum pinnatum variegata, and that was the one that had root rot and stem rot and was basically just floating on that moss pole. So since I've repotted it, it has given me this leaf over here, which is definitely a little bit deformed, which was to be expected. This plant has gone through quite a bit of shock. First, it lost all of its root system, and then it was also chopped. But it is already growing its next leaf over here. So it is definitely growing, and that is a second shoot down here, which is also starting to grow. So yeah, basically the signs of growth tell me that it's definitely on its way up. It's being, you know, it's enjoying itself again. But of course, after so much stress, I need to give it a little bit of time. I can't expect this plant to grow in the same rate as my Cebu blue, who has literally not had to go through any stress. Right next to my baby bread, we've got 2 scindapsus. Now, they are absolutely getting scorched with sun, and it's definitely one of these plants where, look, I don't really care too much. I've been just neglecting them. I mean, I water them around about once a week, but I don't really put any effort in the look of this plant or the setup or repotting and so on. So I'm happy for it to be exposed to a little bit more sun, see if it can handle it. These plants are really easy to take care of. You can see how this is kind of curling in. That's a telltale sign that this plant just needs a little bit of watering. After I water it, they'll just flatten out again and get a little bit thicker and juicier. So these sort of plants just really tell you what they need and when they need it. So just always pay attention to your plants. Understand the signs that your plants give up to tell you that, hey, I need water, hey, I need more light, and so on. I think that is much more valuable than trying to follow a strict like 10-step guide to growing a specific plant. Water every 7 days, fertilize every 10, and so on. Just look at the plant and understand the language the plant uses to tell you what it wants. Right next to it, we've got a variegated Burlamax. It's also getting a little bit burned, but I'm trying to get it used to the higher sunlight exposure. So it's to be expected once you move a plant from a rather dark corner to a corner that gets much more light, that these leaves aren't really used to that much light exposure and they might get burned a little bit. But the leaves that come thereafter, they should already be exposed to the light from early stages on, so they should become a little bit more resilient to that sunlight. Of course, there is such thing as too much sunlight. They could just get absolutely burned, but that's why I'm keeping a close eye on it, making sure that it's not actually being burned. But we'll find out. And my Oxalis over here, I just did a plant spotlight on this plant, talking all about the plant, the journey the plant and I have been through together, and how I created this really lush pot. So make sure to check out that video if you're interested in more, but it's such an easy plant. You just need to make sure that you water it enough and you give it a lot of bright light, but it's super rewarding and it really adds a nice pop of color into my apartment. So yeah, it is basically taking up the entire coffee table. Oh, I forgot about these ones. Down here we've got Philodendron biliatii or biliatii, and I believe there's 2 plants on here. There's 2 plants on here. I still haven't had it for all too long, but you can see that it started growing roots up the pole. So very similar to the Atabapoense. Obviously also has established quite a nice root system within the pot already. So now that summer is here, I reckon this is going to go crazy. Definitely it is a climber. You can see that over here, this plant, and I have not trained this, but this plant has already started slowly climbing up that moss pole. And obviously the roots in the moss pole are also indicating that it's really happy with its position. Now, you don't need to give this plant a moss pole. I've seen plenty of people grow this plant to maturity without using a moss pole, but I just use the moss pole as a vertical extension of the pot. So I don't want to give it a larger pot to give it more room. Instead, I'm just giving it more room for roots vertically, because, well, I have much more vertical space in my apartment than I have horizontal space. I mean, overall, I'm really trying to maximize the space I've got available for plants in my apartment by going vertical. Right? These moss poles are basically just like big pieces of decoration. They're art, like they are my equivalent of artwork. So yeah, I have much more space vertically in my apartment, and probably most of us do. So I keep the footprint of my plants quite small. Most of them are just in 20-centimeter pots. Some of them might be in 25 centimeters if they're getting a little bit too large, like the dubia, for example, I put in a 25-centimeter pot. But ultimately, I just really bank on the fact that the plant is a climber and that the plant is growing a large root system into the moss pole. So I get away with small pots. Then I pop these small nursery pots into a larger, heavy decorative planter just to give it stability. But of course, as the plant grows really large, the stability is eventually jeopardized. So that's another reason why I love a good chop and extend, just less risk of any of them falling over or dying. And then right next to it, we've got my Monstera Thai constellation. It is probably one of the slowest growing plants in my collection, but it is growing really nicely. So every leaf that it gives me is really beautiful. So I actually really like this plant because it's like really low maintenance. I water this maximum every 2 weeks. I've repotted this, I think, 3 times in its life, and I've had it for about 2 years. So it's very, very minimal work, very minimal effort. But once these leaves start growing quite nice and large, they're high reward. Now, with all of my plants on moss poles, what I do is I really start them as a small cutting. So you saw the Cheronii in the cabinet, for example. I love getting plants at that size and then really growing them in my environment. That way, the plant is used to my environment. Every leaf that it has grown is used to my environment and is resilient to my conditions over here. That way, I actually managed to grow them to maturity without having the perfect conditions. If you import a plant that was grown in a tropical environment, for example, you know, somewhere in the Amazon rainforest, you import that plant into your apartment somewhere in the northern hemisphere with like, I don't know, 30% humidity, that plant is gonna suffer. That plant is not used to your environment, so it's gonna die, and that has nothing to do with you. You can do everything correct. Just the pure shock and change of environment for that plant is not gonna be, like, that plant is not gonna be able to cope with it. But if you get a smaller plant and you slowly get it used to your environment, so I, for example, slowly get it used to my environment from first putting it in the cabinet, which is like perfect conditions, then slowly moving it out of the cabinet, putting it on a moss pole, and then getting it growing up in my environment. So it slowly adjusts to my conditions, and then it starts growing in my conditions. These leaves grow more resilient. So I always start small and growing to maturity in your environment rather than getting a mature plant, popping it in your environment and hoping for the best. Also, it kind of takes the whole fun out of it. Like, the main incentive for me is actually growing a plant from a small cutting to a mature plant and really having this proud plant parent moment that gives you, like, I did that. You know? That's really rewarding for me, and that's what's giving me that gratification of that plant hobby, rather than me just getting that instant gratification by just going to the nursery and buying a new plant on a daily basis. Next up, we've got an albo over here. So this is my variegated Monstera. I am planning on doing a plant spotlight on this specific plant as well, because this plant has given me a lot of trouble over the years, but a lot of trouble also means a lot of lessons learned. So I thought it would be worthwhile sharing them with you. At this stage, I'm really happy with it, right? But I think I've been hating on it for over a year. So I'm slowly warming up to it again. And because I'm warming up to it again, I'm paying a little bit more attention to it. And then in return, once you start paying a little bit more attention to it, it actually starts growing much nicer as well. So this is in desperate need for an extension. And I'll just do the extension and the plant spotlight sometime really soon for you guys. On the left over here, we've got my Philodendron micans, one of my very first plants, one of the oldest ones I've still got in my collection, and I'm honestly not doing much with it. Instead of chopping and extending it, I'll just wrap it up and down that pole to just give it a really nice lush look. Over here, we've got a Philodendron soderini, or at least it was sold to me as soderini. Soderini is supposed to be a small form of Philodendron sodiroi, but since I've had it and I've grown it, it's not really that small anymore. So I don't know if it's me or if it's the plant. I don't know. I still really like it, and it's really easy going as well. I put very minimal effort into this one. I just keep the moss pole moist and it just does its thing. All right, another new addition to my collection since we last did a houseplant tour is this Aglaonema pictum tricolor. It is a tissue cultured one, so the colors aren't quite as nice yet. I don't know if it will ever develop these really beautiful colors that the non-tissue culture ones will, but I can definitely see a difference. But it could also just be due to the conditions. I literally just got this very recently. So I'm excited to see what it looks like when grown in my conditions, and if I can get that nice coloring that the non-tissue culture plant usually gives you. Now, the reason I have had so many new additions since we last did the plant tour, because we only did the last plant tour like a month ago, the only reason is because it was my birthday, and what would people give me if it's not plants, right? So I didn't actually buy any of these. I was gifted them, so thank you. But yeah, I'm not really adding any new plants to my collection. Actually, I did buy the Cheronii because I really wanted that one. But overall, I'm not really adding many plants to my collection at the moment. I'm already pretty busy just keeping on top of the growth my existing plants give me. So I rather pay attention to the ones that I already have and maximize them, optimize their growth, bring out the best in them, rather than just, you know, making them compete with more and more and more plants that I'm going to add to my collection. As I said before, prioritizing plants is probably one of the trickiest things I have to deal with. I need to make a decision. Which plant do I want to see mature and which plant do I just care a little bit less about? The more plants I add, the harder that decision gets. So I'm kind of like hoping that this is it. But I'm sure it won't be. Alrighty, and then this is my little display of alocasias, which is also filling in really nicely with the beginning of spring. So I've got about 5 or 6 different alocasias in here. They're all potted up individually. I just put them in a big like decorative planter. This is not actually a decorative planter. This is actually like a storage box, but it was round and it was only like 10 bucks. So a super, super cheap and lightweight option. And I still think it looks great. So, you know, things like that don't have to be expensive. I'm always looking out for inexpensive but good looking things. Aesthetics are really like the main driver behind my plant hobby. So yeah, it's not necessarily just price, but if I can hit both, find something inexpensive and it looks good, then that's a deal. Alrighty, I think that's pretty much it, but maybe let's quickly have a look at the balcony as well, because now that spring is here, I popped a lot of plants on the balcony just to see if they can survive. Most of them won't, spoiler alert, but let's check them out anyway. Alrighty, out on the balcony. So again, this is northeast facing over here, and my balcony gets way too much sun. Very, very harsh, bright sun, a lot of UV here in Australia, and it is fully exposed. So the winds are crazy. So I'm very limited with what plants can actually grow out here and survive. So I opted mainly for a native tree over here. It's a bottle brush tree that can grow nice little red flowers, which it just hasn't done at the moment. Any sort of plant that I'm not super fond of just goes out here. Most of them get burned, oopsie, but I'm giving them one last chance, you know. So it's like, well, if you can thrive out here, you're allowed to stay. If you can't thrive out here, then unfortunately you'll have to go. So a few of these will definitely have to go, but one plant that I noticed is doing extremely well out here, and much better than any of my Marantas inside are Marantas, right? So at the beginning of spring, I cut this back completely. There was nothing left in here. So all of these are just the new leaves that have formed over maybe the last 2 or 3 weeks. And you can see that beautiful color, like that purplish, that is just because it's actually getting sun stressed over here. So sun stressed enough to give me this beautiful purple color, but not sun stressed enough to burn. So happy days. Maybe I'll show you something here. This over here, like these teeny tiny shitty leaves, that was the winter growth, right? So it stayed out here all during winter as well. So it had like these ones. I just cut all of these off, and then all of these are just new shoots. And I mean, there's like, I feel like 20 leaves unfurling at the time at the moment. So this is going to grow really, really large, really, really quickly. It loves it out here. And the only other plant from the balcony that I really want to highlight is another Canna lily cleopatra. I don't know. That was my first Canna lily, and I bought it mainly because it's able to grow these beautiful, like half red, half green leaves. Most of them are either fully green or fully red, unfortunately, but every now and then it throws out these amazing half ones or some sort of variation of them. So yeah, is another plant that can handle a lot of sun. Like, it loves the direct sun. So I just pop it out here, and it's going to grow really, really fast, really, really quickly, giving the plants on the other side of the window just a little bit more shade so they won't get burned by the harsh summer sun here in Australia. It also flowers really nicely, so, and it also grown all throughout winter on the balcony, and it doesn't actually stop growing. So highly, highly recommend that. If you have any sort of really harsh environment with a lot of sun, a lot of wind, they can actually handle it quite well. All right, that was my updated living room tour. Now, a few things have changed since the last time I took you through my living area, but it hasn't changed too much. Look, most of my plants are really, really happy, and as I said, don't fix what's not broken. So I tried and moved some of the plants around just to fit with the new layout of the furniture, but I also didn't want to change too much because, you know, if they're currently happy, then keep them where they are. But we'll see if I need to reevaluate the setup as the sun moves and as we get closer into summer, and we're just going to get hotter days and more sunlight, hopefully. So as I said, it's always a continuous process, and really my whole goal is to just create a really nice environment, like a symbiotic environment that the plants, myself, and Brad can all use and enjoy. I don't want to turn this into a growth tent. You know, I know that some plants might be a little bit happier in different spots, but I also live here, right? I can't block like my walkway. I can't block like, you know, my TV with plants just because the plant is going to have like beautiful light over there. I'm trying to compensate for that, or I'm trying to move my items, my furniture items like the TV, the couch, the dining table, trying to move them into the dark corners of the room already. But ultimately, I don't want to compromise too much. I need to feel really comfortable over here, and I want to live over here. I want this to give me jungle vibes, but still be nice and neat. Anyway, thanks for joining me on my little updated living room tour today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click like, subscribe, and leave a nice comment, and I'll see you next time around. Bye.